Hello students, so in my previous lectures I have already discussed what is resting potential, what is action potential, what is depolarization, what is repolarization. So in this video I'll just be discussing this in very brief, as I've already discussed in detail about these terms in my previous lectures. So just I'll discuss in brief and we will proceed further towards the next topic of this video, that is propagation of action potential. So before actually moving into the topic, let's see what is resting potential. Actually when all the cells, the specialized cells, they are always in resting potential state. Okay, the specialized cells, they are always in resting potential state, and when that cell gets excited because of some external energy supplied to the cell, or because of the ionic current flow, when the cell gets excited, then what happens? The cell gets depolarized, or you can say a potential gets generated across the cell, which is called action potential. And the process of the shifting of the cell from resting potential to the action potential is called depolarization. Then what is repolarization? When the cell when the action potential of the cell gets shifted to the resting potential, then we can say that the repolarization of the cell has occurred. And once the cell gets excited, that once the action potential has got generated in the cell, once the cell goes through the action potential state and then again it comes back to the resting potential state, now for a certain period of time we cannot excite the same cell because of the refractory period of the cell. So these things you need to remember, you need to know before actually proceeding towards the main topic, that is propagation of action potential. So in this lecture I am going to discuss how the action potential gets propagated. So in this previous lectures I have discussed how the cell gets depolarized or repolarized, how the action potential gets developed in an individual cell. Now in this lecture I'll discuss how the action potential gets developed in the individual cell, how the action potential which gets developed in the individual cell actually propagates through the different types of cells, or you can say propagate through the other cells. So here we will discuss about the propagation of action potential. So let me take an example. Suppose this is the nerve cell. So this is the fiber of the nerve cell. What happens? The action potential in the nerve cell gets generated only at a specific segment. Suppose this is the segment where the action potential got generated. Now because of the action potential, what will happen? Ionic current will flow, because since this portion, this segment of this nerve cell, this segment of the nerve cell is actually going through the depolarization process. It is actually going through the depolarization process, and because of depolarization process, what is happening? Ionic currents are flowing. Now because of the ionic currents, what will happen? And because of this depolarization, what is happening? It will reach the action potential. The action potential will get developed across this segment, and during this process what is happening? Ionic currents are flowing in this segment, and because of the ionic currents flow, what will happen? The segment that is adjacent to this previous segment, the segment which is adjacent to this previous segment where the ionic current is flowing, it will get excited because of this ionic current flow. And now next what will happen? Because of the ionic current flow, this adjacent segment is excited, and now this segment will undergo depolarization process and achieve or acquire action potential. While the depolarization process is occurring in this segment, what will happen? In the previous segment, repolarization of the segment will occur, that is, it will switch from action potential to the resting potential. So the next moment what is happening? Repolarization of the previous segment will take place, and depolarization of the adjacent segment will take place, and this segment will achieve the action potential. Again, since the depolarization process is taking place in this segment, what will happen? Which means ionic current is flowing in this segment, and because of the ionic current flow, the adjacent segment will get excited. And again this segment will undergo depolarization, will achieve action potential, and because of this process ionic current will flow, and again because of the ionic current flow the adjacent segment will get excited. So how the action potential is propagating? Action potential is propagating from one segment to another segment. Now one more thing says, let me take the example of this segment. When this segment is undergoing the depolarization process, because of which what is happening, ionic current is flowing, and because of this ionic current flow this adjacent segment will get excited. Now you might have a question, because of the ionic current flow the previous segment should also get excited because it has already come to the resting potential. Now it should get excited, but it won't get excited because I have already told you, once the cell which has achieved action potential or which has gone through the depolarization and repolarization process, that cell will not get excited for a short period of time because of the refractory period. So the action potential will always travel in one direction only, it will always propagate in one direction only. So the action potential or the depolarization process of this segment of any segment will not excite the previous segment. It will not excite the previous segment, it will not be able to excite the previous segment because of the refractory period, because of the absolute or relative refractory period. So the action potential will only travel in one direction. So it is how this action, in case of nerve cell the action potential is propagating from segment to segment, or in case of any cell what we can say, the action potential is propagating from cell to cell. So this is how action potential gets propagated, or you can say how the adjacent cells get excited because of the previous cells. Now the rate at which an action potential moves down a fiber, as you can see, now the rate at which the action potential moves down a fiber or is propagated from cell to cell, it is called the propagation rate. The term is called propagation rate. What is propagation rate? Propagation rate is the propagation of the action potential, the rate at which the action potential is propagating either from one segment to another or from cell to cell. So in nerve fibers, like in this case in nerve fibers, the propagation rate is also called nerve conduction rate or conduction velocity, and this velocity varies widely depending on the type and diameter of the nerve fiber. So the velocity it actually ranges in nerves, so the velocity that actually ranges in nerves is from 20 meter per second to 140 meter per second, that is 20 meter per second up to 140 meter per second. This is the propagation rate of the action potential in case of nerves. Whereas the propagation through heart muscle is slower, with an average rate from 0.2 meter per second to 0.4 meter per second, 0.2 meter per second to 0.4 meter per second. Oh, sorry, yeah, let me write it here, 0.4 meter per second. So spatial time delay fibers between the atria and the ventricles of the heart causes action potential to propagate at an even slower rate, that is 0.03 meter per second to 0.05 meter per second. So in the next slide I have already shown that is how depolarization, this is the fiber of the nerve cell, and how the depolarization of one segment is actually exciting the adjacent segment, how the adjacent segment is getting depolarized because of the ionic current flow in the previous segment, and this depolarization of this segment will not be able to excite the previous segment because of the refractory period, it will only excite the adjacent segment. So now this segment will get depolarized and the ionic current flow in this segment, and again this ionic current flow will actually excite the next segment. So this is how the action potential is propagating, and in nerve cells the propagation rate of the action potential is from 20 meter per second to 140 meter per second. So this was all about the propagation of action potential. In the next lecture I will be discussing about how we going to measure the bioelectric potentials. So I am ending this class here. Thank you.